use of AI, we have a critical need to look at it more comprehensively. I've worked with my friend here, Monica, for quite some time, my fellow colleague at UI, um, uh, and uh, uh, and Monica has mentioned about the great work that Pam does, and um, Ms. Pam Isom, great to have you. Welcome to this panel, and uh, Dr. Samtani, Sagar, it's been a pleasure to know you, and I think you're going in the right direction. Kind of taking it to a scale, both in terms of research as well as the outreach and the knowledge that needs to be in this space. And finally, of course, my good friend and partner Jim Reavis from Cloud Security Alliance. And the very reason having Jim here is if I know a person who can take a problem when it is or a challenge when it is hyped to actually build an ecosystem around it, nobody knows this better than Jim does. So with that, I'll probably go do a quick round of introductions, and then we'll dive right into the flow. And it's my honor and pleasure to have Pamela Isom to kick off this panel and introduce yourself, please, ma'am.
Good afternoon and evening for everyone. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this great panel. I'm Pam Isom. I'm the director of the AI and Technology Office here at the Department of Energy. And I have been the director for this office since August. So I'm new in the official role as director, but I was acting director for about 4 months. So I was acting director for about 4 months, starting in April of this year. And then prior to that, I was in the CIO office. And just throughout my career in general, I have been directing and been an executive with the federal government, and in the private sector prior to joining the federal government had worked quite significantly with data science and artificial intelligence, and very much an architect type of thinker. So I appreciate being here, very concerned about security and securing AI, and looking forward to the panel.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Monica, how about you go next?
Thank you very much, Val. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Monika Wilczak, an executive advisor in artificial intelligence and emerging technologies. I'm a former managing director with EY and Accenture, and before that, financial services executive with over 2 decades of client-side experience in analytics, data, and artificial intelligence. And currently, I'm working with the US government on innovation, design, and delivery of transformational data and AI capabilities, as well as providing advisory services for sustainable and trusted AI. And that, of course, includes helping clients make sure that their AI is working as intended, which means, among other things, ensuring that AI is safe, resilient, and secure. I am also a mentor to technology startups in that space, and I do appreciate the opportunity to serve on this panel and look forward to a robust discussion with my co-presenters.
Excellent. Thank you, Monica. Let's go to Sagar. Intro your introductions, please.
Yeah, thank you, Val. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel with so many distinguished colleagues here. So my name is Sagar Samtani. I'm an assistant professor at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. So I come more from the research and education side. A lot of my background has been developing artificial intelligence for cybersecurity applications, specifically in identifying emerging threats and key threat actors from the dark web for threat intelligence applications. I also do a lot of work within vulnerability assessment, specifically identifying the different types of vulnerabilities in emerging cyber infrastructures. And lately, a lot of my work has focused in on AI risk management by looking at the publicly accessible source code of AI that's available on GitHub, doing vulnerability assessments on them, trying to identify how those vulnerabilities propagate throughout cyberspace through forking activity and so on. So thank you so much, Val, for allowing me to be part of this panel today.
Of course, great to have you. Jim, sir, your introductions, please.
Thanks, Val, for inviting me to this, and it's great to be on such a panel of experts. My name is Jim Reavis. I have been a cybersecurity professional for about 30 years. founded Cloud Security Alliance in 2009. We've grown that to an organization with over 116,000 members, 400 or so research artifacts, the largest cloud provider certification program, individual certification in cloud security, as well as cloud auditing, over 100 chapters around the world. And we haven't done a lot, but we are looking at AI and where that fits into the research initiatives we should be doing.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all for joining this panel. Maybe we start with Ms. Isom and Monika about defining this program and the problem statement around securing AI. Pamela, if you can kick off that, how do we actually go about defining the problem? Because I don't think people really understand in general the challenges that are related to AI. We are regular consumers and users, but there's definitely a lot of threats and vulnerabilities lurking behind. So please.
Okay, so I can start by sharing my perspective here. And my perspective and my concern is that when it comes to AI, that we really don't know how to secure our solutions. So we know that it provides this wonderful capability, rapid analytics, can sort through video and streaming data faster than you could ever do yourself. And so we appreciate all of that, but I don't think that we really have a good grasp on the security side. And so when I think about the life cycle of AI and I think about some of the vulnerability points, we know that we love the fact that you can have supervised and unsupervised models and algorithms. So when we think about training the data sets, we think that that's just fabulous, right? You train the data sets to do the things that we need them to do. We test the data sets. We're using data sets to get the results that we expect. But there's the vulnerability right there. So there's data poisoning that gets introduced. There's data biases that get introduced in the training process, right? And so, and the labels themselves that we start out with may not end up being that we started out with, right? Because that's a vulnerable zone. The other one is around the algorithms and the fact that model biases can get introduced. And so a lot of times when I'm thinking about securing AI, I'm also talking about the trustworthiness and responsible impacts of AI. So I kind of put them all together because an insecure AI is also not reliable. It's not trustworthy, right? So that's why I sometimes put them together. But if I'm looking at that life cycle and thinking about the problem set, it's those areas, the learning algorithm, the model itself. At this point, you start out with one model where the vulnerability is if the vulnerability is taken advantage of, one set of labels may turn into a whole set of new labels that you didn't even anticipate, right? So it's the whole life cycle. And then you don't stop there, but the whole monitoring of the AI solutions is vulnerable, and it needs to happen so that we are tracking the operational aspects and the operational outcomes of the AI. And so that is my concern when it comes to the AI. It's the whole life cycle needs to be monitored better, and we need to learn how to secure our solutions from end to end, even starting with the supply chain. So starting with the supply chain and ending with the consumer that is actually the user of the AI. We got to keep monitoring it. So that's kind of my frame of reference. Monika?
Yeah, what I can do is I probably would like to underscore that the security of AI is really paramount to AI adoption. We see it right now in the market, working with clients, that security is not just one of many challenges that AI faces, but in fact, according to many analysts, even as reported by Gartner, it is the top barrier to implementation of AI methodologies within organizations. And it is the number one reason why about 80% which is 4 out of 5 successful proofs of concept in AI never go beyond that stage, never get operationalized and put into production, preventing organizations from really truly realizing the potential of AI, exactly what Pam underscored. And it is because the challenge with securing AI is quite complex. And it starts with really understanding what security means in the context of AI. And it also requires understanding that there are other things that are incorporated into this concept. And they are referred to as resilience and safety and combined into one of the key principles, as even stated in the executive mandate from the White House, that really is very interesting to read through, and because it lays out the very prescriptive way of thinking about it. And safety, of course, it ensures that AI is deployed as intended, that predominantly doesn't harm the communities or the humanity, right? And then the resilience ensures that when AI is confronted with threats, it continues to work as intended. And everything that Pam spoke about. So this challenge with securing AI is also multiplied because AI increases the dimensionality and complexity of risk surfaces. And the two things that really are important to remember, that AI is different than traditional technologies, right? Because it is not static, but it is dynamic. It is not deterministic, but it is probabilistic. And it's not implemented, but it's applied. And there is no defined performance standard that can be used as a benchmark. What it means is that these systems need to be continuously monitored and tested for weaknesses. It also means that different types of robustness to really deal with cyber attacks needs to be built into the systems. They need to be able to adjust, and we will talk about it probably later, about how AI can be used in service of enhancing AI security. And then you really, as Pam pointed out, all of that needs to be deployed across the whole life cycle. And then secondly, the whole ecosystem of AI is more complex than the one of traditional technologies, is because the speed of execution, diversification of data and the sources, like open source data, and the sophistication of algorithms, not to mention the use of the cloud and open source software by developers, all of those things converge on a very unique set of circumstances, which introduce a very nuanced and complicated risk surfaces. And all of those dimensions need to be accounted for and addressed in a very comprehensive program that one needs to think about of creating to deal with AI security.
Absolutely. And I think the distinction between how traditional infrastructure and application and products have been, which is incremental and typically static, I think I cannot overemphasize what Pam and Monika just mentioned about the dynamic nature of AI itself. It's a completely different beast to capture. So that brings me to the next question, and probably this goes to Sagar. You, in terms of the, you're looking at both things, I believe, in terms of using AI to secure and also securing AI itself. How do you see the challenges of applying traditional cybersecurity solutions or the foundational, capabilities itself to securing AI? It seems like a dog trying to catch its tail, and it goes in circles, right?
Yeah, no. First of all, I want to just really again emphasize the points that Monika and Pamela made. I 100% agree with their points, and very well articulated there as well. I think one thing I want to add on to what Monika had mentioned, as before getting into the question about the securing the AI part, is the speed of adoption for AI models is significantly higher or faster than what you'd see for conventional infrastructure. If you think about the procurement process, for instance, that an organization would have to go through for just being able to get networking or switches or different types of devices into an environment, there's always a cost, and there's always going to be types of things that you do for making sure that you're getting the best equipment, and there's going to be time delays and so on. With AI, it's as simple as import scikit-learn into your Python language. It's just literally as simple as that, and you can start to get access into the AI models, AI approaches, and so on. Albeit, more simplistic machine learning models, but nevertheless, you still get the opportunity to get into that environment very quickly. And a lot of that is because open source types of technologies and the push towards open science and open technologies has just been so great. So it provides a lot of benefits there. Now, getting to your question more specifically, Val, is just in the conventional cybersecurity vulnerability assessment task. You can do a lot of vulnerability assessments with off-the-shelf tools like Nessus or Qualys or Burp Suite and so on for different types of technologies, such as your workstations, your servers, or laptops, and so on and so forth. More and more, there's been tools that have looked at how do we assess the vulnerabilities within source code. So going to the source code level and trying to identify their open API keys, usernames and passwords, insecure coding practices, and so on. But all of these tools assume that the asset that's being scanned can be probed to some extent. When you're doing vulnerability assessment for AI, there's not as many tools that exist for that particular task right now. And just this year, we're starting to see about 4 or 5 tools that are coming out, but they're still in very nascent stages. So if I could point to the work that IBM is doing in terms of releasing tools to check for trustworthiness and bias within the data, or point to some of the tools that my friend Hiram Anderson at Microsoft has released with Counterfeit. They're still in early stages of their development in terms of the different types of ways that you can assess the vulnerabilities in AI. So that's one of the fundamental differences right now between the way that we can apply conventional security processes, technologies, and tools into this context, is that some of those conventional tools and practices have been around for quite a while now, and they've matured. There's an entire market behind them. However, the market around AI vulnerability assessment, AI penetration testing, those types of things has not quite gotten to that stage yet. And we're still exploring as to what are the conditions that we need to have in order to execute those activities. So one of the things that my research group has discovered so far is that a lot of these AI models, you can't just go into the source code, the raw source code, and just be able to identify what kinds of vulnerabilities an AI set of source code would have. You actually have to deploy it as an endpoint and then go ahead and do the vulnerability assessment on that. So those types of approaches, we're still discovering in terms of what the best practices are for maybe developing a refined set of security practices for AI models and AI techniques.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is again back to fundamental research in security for something that we can apply that is tried and tested, but it will completely new paradigm of product and services, right? So thank you for that, Sagar. Jim, let me move to you next. I think you've probably seen these cycles come and go, but one that stuck and probably as one of the pioneers, some have taken a leap of faith. Some call them visionary, but I think especially when cloud started, it was it was a hype, and then with you and the whole crew at CSA, you're able to put together a structure to that market to provide guidance that the service providers could at least adhere to, or at least the industry can point to. And AI seems to be going even multiple times faster than the cloud ecosystem has moved. So what are your thoughts around getting some of these structured ecosystem developed around AI to secure, maybe provide some guidance around that?
Good question. And I think one thing that I could say is just a truism is that security does trail innovation in almost all cases. And that's a real challenge. And that was one of the inspirations for starting Cloud Security Alliance when we did, is this idea, let's solve tomorrow's problems today. And when we started, cloud was in this pilot, very nascent adoption, but we knew that if we started at that point creating the security best practices for organizations, when a few years later it was becoming critical mass, they would already have that body of work. And so security would not be stopping the business from leveraging new technology. And I think that's very important. I think that's probably part of having the discussion about this now. I will say, and I am not an AI expert, but you could argue that cloud has been the key technology that has driven us from updating software a few times a year to many, many times a day. So it's very dynamic. And I think there's also some learning there that some of the agile DevOps frameworks, maturely structured and implemented, are increasing the rate with which we're able to change our technology, but also do it with much higher quality because we're establishing some frameworks within which the developers operate. So problems are that the vulnerability research ecosystem, definitely love Sagar's take on this, it's not kept pace with the technology, and it's very fragmented. So, and there's a few reasons why, but if you look at when something like MITRE CVE was started and this huge growth in technology, just generally speaking, we are not seeing a proportionate increase in the documented vulnerabilities that are out there, not anywhere close. It's way off. And there's a lot of proprietary vulnerability databases out there. There's a lot of like bug bounty things where that doesn't make its way into the public domain. There's a lot of nation state ownership of vulnerabilities, which I think I would want to highlight for the people on the panel. That's going to be an ongoing issue and concern, that there's not going to be the incentive to do that. So I think some of the lessons learned from the cloud security journey and maybe some others are that it's definitely a whole of industry effort, and the domain subject matter experts from a technology perspective are not the ones who exclusively can solve the problem. And when you look at pen testers or people that look at things from very different ways, there's a lot of creativity that goes into that it's really a whole of industry effort where we want the hackers, we want the policymakers, we want the ethicists, we want the AI experts, we want all of those. And I think that the research that needs to be done on how you secure this and the actions need to be done with a great deal of transparency, a great deal of let's maximize the stakeholders involved. Let's use the crowdsourcing where we can. Let's have a whole of industry effort, and certainly where we can get government and other organizations involved. That's really going to help. And we really got to define the problem. And I think in its completeness, in that we are concerned about vulnerabilities of AI itself. And I think we've all seen that, and that's been very well documented, but also ethical use of AI used as a cyber attack mechanism, which again, is going to create a lot of this tension for certain stakeholders wanting to hold on to the vulnerabilities and the improvements in a closed way, which is what we got to fight. And so that maximum transparency in something that I would say is more, as Cloud Security Alliance has done, more of an informal effort where it's really owned by all of the stakeholders, all of that good work. That's kind of the approach I would think would make a lot of sense.
Hey, now I think can draw so many parallels from where cloud was and where it is today, and the journey to how we can secure AI. Pam, coming next to you, I think I cannot overemphasize the fact that all of a sudden, I think the US government has realized the importance of securing AI and how fast you have to do this. It's not just that you have to do it, but how fast you do it, to the extent that you are leading the office for artificial intelligence, right? Of which, of course, you kind of laid the foundation for. What are your expectations from, on one hand, what's the mission, and what are your expectations from the industry to serve and support that mission?
So I think that I heard the mention of a whole of industry, and there should be the whole of government approach as well. I believe that we should focus on and get better at establishing policies and procedures and a bit more standardization, but still allow flexibility and creativity. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about, we have the AI risk management playbook that we just rolled out. And the playbook in itself, I mean, we thought about this a year and a half ago, right? Before folks were even really talking about managing and mitigating risks when it comes to AI, because everybody was so busy they were fascinated with AI and what AI can do. But some people were off saying, yeah, that's a good thing, but there's some controls that we need to put in place, like governance. And my office in particular is very focused on the holistic aspect, because we know that there's economies of scale, there's growth, there's reuse, there's redundancy, there's duplication, even in the cyberspace, right? In the cybersecurity space. So these issues are replicating themselves, and we have to get better at identifying where they are and mitigating those risks. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a big proponent of trustworthy and responsible AI. And so we want to see policies around policies and governance and stewardship around the algorithms. And are we able to access the right algorithms? And what are the test protocols that we should put in place to ensure that our AI has not been tampered with? And if it has, what are the procedures in place to recover from that type of situation? And I believe that those are things that we are needing to focus on more. We're in the middle of developing the AI strategy for the department. And when I look to industry, like today when I'm talking and collaborating with folks outside of my own organization, I'm looking for diversity. I'm looking for different perspectives, different opinions, different ideas. And that's the same thing that we should be doing when we're looking at our AI solutions, right? Diversity of data. I was telling someone just this week, to me, it's not so much about the vast amount of data as it is the diversity, right? So the diverse aspects to the data so that we're testing multiple scenarios and multiple circumstances to address a problem. And so we're looking for things like that. We're looking for things around, and sometimes we call it the dynamic data fabric. That's what I have been talking to Monika about. But we're looking for that type of platform where there is data that you can get to, that you can access easily, but also that's secured. So secure your data, secure that entire life cycle. And we have to help the workforce understand how to do it. So that's kind of our focus. And I'm actually quite honored to be in the role. I'm delighted because there are some changes that we want to see made. And so this helps drive that capability and the things that we need, and that partnership with industry and academia, as well as across the government.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that, for taking the charge of this important mission. So Monika, let me move to you in terms of getting a sense of the technical controls that need to be in place. What can we expect there to put in place in this case for a dynamic environment such as AI that we are tracking? And you and I probably work together on a couple of point of views. So please share or throw light on for this audience.
Yes, thank you. I think, first of all, I think it's already clear that these technical controls need to be a part of a very comprehensive and integrated approach for security around AI. And they need to combine all aspects of the ecosystem. We already talked about the data. Of course, there are other assets, infrastructure, physical, digital, software models. And what's key here is that software safeguards are not alone sufficient. And so the other point I want to make sure that I'll just highlight is the fact that all of these technical controls and the whole approach to development of the AI solutions need to include from the onset of the initiative proper design of security programs. We call it security by design. It is the key practice that really helps to build strong foundation of proactive management of risks associated with security of AI. And so let me just highlight 3 areas of these technical controls. First one we already talked about, but I think it's worth reminding everyone again that starting with securing the data is paramount for success. It is one of the tactics in the first line of defense that we can already implement. This approach must include data as well as the whole supply chain, right? Going back to the provenance of the data. And we know that this whole supply chain can be quite complex. It includes a lot of potential providers of data, aggregators, in some cases, we can negotiate contract with them to make sure that we transfer some of the risks and we have the proper certifications and proper ways of control all of the risks in a way that is accountable and responsible. We also know that we can deploy a lot of techniques we've been using for traditional analytics and data management. And of course, all of that includes encryption of data all the time through the whole life cycle, making sure that we have the proper identity management, sufficient logging and monitoring. All of that, it's still valid. So AI doesn't eliminate any of that. But it is important to mature all of these practices and add things that really, for example, help ensure that there are multifaceted internal security best practices baked into the process. Again, across the whole life cycle, from the design, and that intermediary and interdisciplinary approach, bringing in perspectives of a variety of key stakeholders is critical to that. And then it needs to be also part of the development, validation, operationalization, and ongoing monitoring. And that cycle from edge devices incorporating some very advanced neural networks, processing systems, all the way through the applications that run on them and carry their data to the cloud, all of that needs to be very carefully designed and considered. Pam already talked about leveraging the modern data fabric. Why is that important in terms of security? Well, it helps minimize movement of data, and static data or stationary data is easier to secure than data in motion. So the one big benefit is definitely coming from this dynamic modern data fabric. The other thing is that that approach helps enforce a set of information flow controls, and really where the data can be transmitted within and between systems, limiting data transfers, limiting embedded data types, all of that, it's really easier to execute with this modern data fabric approach. And I already mentioned the comprehensive third-party risk program. That's a key. I know it's not easy because very often we don't know all the pockets of AI deployments in the organization. So it's key to start with a discovery and inventory of all of the AI assets and data sources, and then revisiting all of these contracts and making sure that this transfer of risk is appropriately addressed. The second big thing, and I mentioned it before, is really getting ready for AI warfare. It's the second line of defense, and it's really critical to think about using AI in service of securing AI, because today's adversaries are employing a lot of AI in their cyber threats, as evidence, for example, by the SolarWinds incident. So traditional cybersecurity methods that do not utilize AI are really no match for these type of threats. And that, I think, was very nicely summarized in the National Security Commission final report earlier this year, when they said that defending against AI-capable adversaries operating at machine speeds in today's environment without employing AI is an invitation to disaster. And I think SolarWinds and many other incidents really very unfortunately in a very clear way articulated that risk. And so it is increasingly vital to start deploying AI techniques comprehensively in the cybersecurity practices. And as a matter of fact, it is one of the best use cases for the use of AI. So I just keep wondering why it is that it is not on the front of our thinking to use AI in service of AI. So what can be done? Automating, for example, data processing. It is autonomous data processing, getting humans to be involved really at the end, after you can really use AI-enabled analytics to do data processing. The second thing is really automating identity management and access control, really implementing as a part of a robust practice. And then something that we already mentioned, it's a platform for model operations and AI operations or ML operations. all of that on the foundation of the right data strategy. And I think it's critical because it helps standardize the way Pam described it. It helps bring consistency. It enables creation of artifacts to really make it easier to validate things when the time comes for validation of models and monitoring these models. So this is a very important technique, and there are many different providers of this platform, but it can be also built on-prem by using some of the foundational elements that many organizations already have.
Right.
And finally, it's all about using AI to monitor all of these vulnerabilities and preventing harm before it happens. It sounds like magic, but indeed, it's really the opportunistic way to get and be preventive in stopping some of these threats. Again, if I for a second come back to SolarWinds incidents, there are certain solutions on the market already that really have shown to be very useful in stopping bad actors from penetrating the walls of the enterprise. In SolarWinds incident, of course, many of the government and industry organizations have been impacted by that. And the fact is that those that had some of those solutions, even though they were penetrated, they didn't really get impacted in terms of bad things happening to them, because even though it was intelligent virus enabled by AI, because they had AI-enabled defense that hardened their perimeter, which we called intelligent cybersecurity, these viruses were too smart to think that they can go and spread themselves in the organization. So they retreated, whereas those organizations that didn't have these mature defenses most likely suffered from some bad losses.
Yeah.
So it's really important to consider getting some of these very brand new solutions that are on the market to augment the existing infrastructure and accelerate some of the maturation around AI security.
Yeah, yeah. So sure, and I think Monika, you bring along a lot of topics that could probably dive into like deeper details. I would like to kind of turn to Jim probably for some of final thoughts. We're running out of time here around the same level of ecosystem guidelines that we prepared. It's probably needless to say most of the AI providers are actually based on cloud. They're cloud providers. And what are your thoughts, maybe concluding thoughts on the development of that ecosystem supported by a working group and a guide that can take this forward? Some of these thoughts that we discussed just today.
Well, I think I'll be really brief, but I think you can get AI vendors together, but really to catalyze change and progress, you need to get the customers together. You need to get the lawyers. You need to get all those together so that the competitive issues between AI vendors are sort of tamped down, and everybody's working towards the common good on these best practices. So the best sort of big tent approach, I think, will really help. And I would just sort of caution that AI solving the AI problem is probably true to a big degree, but we've got to have that outside oracle that's really making sure that we are actually doing the right thing. And sometimes in the machine-to-machine eras, we see some of those problems. But I think that's the broadest stakeholders is the way to make this happen.
Yeah, and thank you, Jim. I think there's definitely a lot of follow-up there. Sagar, I want to conclude with you on your thoughts around and actual applications, some of the findings that you have had, and hopefully your final takeaways from here.
Yeah, I think that the applications of AI for AI security makes a lot of sense. That's actually the approach I'm personally trying to take in my own work, is because if you kind of look at AI as an asset within the organization, you think about all of the different components that Monika laid out. I really resonated with the AI asset management perspective, categorizing, grouping, prioritizing, ranking AI assets. And really, AI is the approach to go ahead and do that. So it's AI for security of AI. It's a little bit of a tongue twister, but I really think that it can make a lot of difference in terms of asset management, vulnerability prioritization, threat detection, and others, because it is still going to be a lot of data that you have to work through to secure AI, and AI, machine learning algorithms, deep learning algorithms can really help out in doing those tasks.
Excellent, and thank you so much. So, again, thank you all for joining on this panel and sharing your thoughts. And Pam, honestly, with Monica and I, we were trying to make sure that you have resources at your disposal and the public-private partnership that we're looking forward, and the resources from the industry to support the great responsibility that you have been entrusted on you, and hopefully we will get there sooner than later. Okay. Thank you for
Thank you.
great thoughts. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.